When my kids were growing up, the start of the school year was always a time of excitement. Excitement for my children, who were happy to see their friends on a daily basis, if not so happy about having to combine that with studies and homework. It was exciting for me too, as I knew my kids were furthering their education and being exposed to new things and new adventures that I couldn't provide for them myself. Back then, the one thing I never thought about was their safety. Schools were such a haven that the idea of being safe never even entered my consciousness. It was simply a given. What a difference a generation makes. Starting with the epidemic of school shootings, which made active shooter drills as common as fire drills, schools were no longer automatically the place where you can go and drop off your kids and feel a sense of peace. And if that wasn't enough, the pandemic led to a lost year of school closings, remote learning, and a perpetual sense of anxiety and worry that things might never return to normal. Now that school is back in session, these concerns continue with added questions about the roles of vaccinations, mask wearing, social distancing, and room ventilation that gets in the way the reasons kids go to school in the first place, to learn. It also raises the question of what it is we're now teaching our kids. Are we teaching them to live in fear, to be anxious about being in public, to get to the place where they might even refuse to go to school? And is there a way to combat this? Well, as someone who's committed to helping others live their dream lives, you know I'm looking for answers that not only allay our fears, but help us move beyond them, to not only survive in this new world we're living in, but to thrive. And toward that end, I'm happy to welcome Florence Ann Romano to the Dream Power Show. Florence is a child care advocate who works tirelessly to promote both physically and mentally healthy children and a supporting community for them and their families. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Florence.
Thank you for having me back, Debbie. It's always so good to be here.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Well, Florence, in some ways, we're in uncharted waters when it comes to creating a healthy atmosphere for our children in these
Right,
times.
right.
What can a parent do, for instance, when their child is so afraid that they demand that they don't go to school?
I think we're seeing a lot of anxiety on both sides of it. I suppose, we're always thinking it's the children who have the fear. It's the children that don't want to go back to school. And yes, that's obvious. But what I'm seeing come out of COVID is all of a sudden, you're looking at these parents who are used to having their kids with them, and they're used to now kind of controlling the situation. And it's interesting to see parents all of a sudden have to go back to giving up that control and trusting other people with their children. And it used to be, like you said, just commonplace. You would just trust that school and you trust those teachers. That's what we did. But I think COVID made us all a little more fearful. And that's why I don't want to just, say it's just kids that are having a hard time with this transition. I think parents are too. And I think that's making the kids also feel a sense of anxiety because they're picking it up from their parents as well. Kids are very perceptive that way. Energy is everything. And so I really want to concentrate on how both parties, parents and children, are coping with it and how they can help each other.
Yeah, well, I tell you, the truth is kids aren't going to be listening to this. It's the parents who are. And you're right, kids don't live in a vacuum.
Right.
And, they are picking up things that are going on all around them. So let's talk about the parent. Uh, how does a parent deal with the fears that they have, whatever the fears may be?
I think talking to other parents is important. I'm seeing a lot of my friends do that, where they're going to their friends in their community and saying, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Is this something you're feeling too? Is it just me? I think in life, we never want to feel we're like the crazy one, right? Like we're the only one who has these thoughts. And so I think parents are turning to other parents to help kind of calm them down in that way and say, okay, I'm not alone in this. And I wonder if I can learn something from these other parents. How are they coping? What are they doing? Yeah. The other thing is, I am a big, big advocate of communication. I think we need to make sure that we're also communicating with our children. Children are fearful of things, and I think they think adults are not scared. Adults seem to have all the answers. Adults, they don't get nervous. They seem infallible. And I like being able to pull back the veil on that for children so they can see that the feelings they're feeling are also similar to what adults are feeling. And that validates them and also makes you relatable to them in a different way, on a different level. And I'm not saying be friends with your children when they're younger. It's just the idea of that emotional connection that makes it safe and then opens the door for more conversation, because kids are resilient. They'll deal with anything. They're better at all that mask stuff than we are. They just do what they're told. We're all out here throwing a fit about it as adults, but they do what they're told, and they do it happily most of the time. We could learn a lot from children, actually. But I think the most important thing is looking at the conversation and knowing that it's a safe place to have that conversation too with your children, and making sure that they know that there's no dumb question, that you don't make them feel intimidated or silly or embarrassed for asking something or feeling something. Think about yourself as an adult. And I always say this: we as adults want to be seen, heard, and understood. That's what's important to us. If we don't think about it, it's at least on that, kind of subconscious level we do. Children want the same thing. So we want to make sure they are seen, heard, and understood too. And because you're able to do that, because there's a reciprocation of that, I think it makes it much easier for us to be able to explain what's happening. Even if we don't like what's happening, it doesn't feel good. Just going back to school and the transition of it, and still having to wear masks and things not being totally back to normal. In life, you learn that things aren't fair, and you have to do things that you don't want to do sometimes. But it's important that we communicate to our children that we as adults have real feelings too, and we can validate each other's.
Well, what about the parents who maybe are afraid to admit that they're afraid?
The parents that admit they're afraid. I think today is the first day to do that. I think today is the first step to do that you can admit you're afraid. And there's a lot to be fearful of in the world, of course, but here's the good news. You're not alone in any of it, parents. Every single parent out there is dealing with exactly what you are. The fears of what's going on in school and getting your kids back, and, sickness and health. And where's this pandemic going? Are we going to go back into a lockdown? Or are kids going to be back homeschooled again? And parents got through that and never wanted to do that again. So to think that they would have to do that again, I think causes a lot of anxiety. And the villages were taken away from all of these people, whether it was grandparents or a babysitter or whomever, a daycare. People were helping you take care of your kids. And then all of a sudden COVID hit and everyone was taken away from each other. And that was extremely traumatic. And I think everybody on some level is dealing with PTSD from it.
I think that's so true. And this is a question that perhaps relates more for younger children. Last year, kids were home, and they had to interact with their teachers and their classmates via computer. And now they're faced with being in a classroom with these people face to face. What can a parent do to help them make that transition?
It's funny that you say that because people have been talking about how even adults have to learn to be social again. Like we don't know how to like be with people anymore. I remember it was recently, like a few months ago, maybe. And it was like the first time I saw people in person. And I remember someone came up to me and gave me like a kiss on the cheek and a hug. And I was like, oh my God. As you know, I mean, like you forget that, like, you could go back to that. But I do think that there is something to be said for re-entering society in that way. But that's the least of my worries, I think, for children, because you see it's like riding a bike. All of a sudden you're back with people and you click back into that. And kids do. They've been missing their village. We talk about how it takes a village to raise a child, but children have their own village. They have people that they need and count on. So I've seen that transition is the easier one out of them for kids.
Another thing, though, is that last year, when kids were being taught at home, they had a lot of free time and probably all used a lot of that time, playing games or watching media or being on phones, a lot more than experts say they should in terms of with their time. So now that they're back in school and doing more of a structured thing, how can a parent keep them on having what I would call more healthier habits and not spend all their time being on screens?
I had said that I really truly think that during COVID, people were like, oh, kids are having too much screen time. They're doing too much of this and that. And I was like, if you take one thing away from these parents when they've already had everything taken away from them, that was never me. I was never giving that advice of like limit that screen time. I'm like, just survive, get through this however you can. Now, like you said, we're back to a little bit more of a normal life. Yes, I think having a routine or going back to some sort of boundaries is important, where you do have a schedule, you have a structure. Maybe you get screen time when you come home for school for an hour before you start your homework, or maybe it's what the reward is at the end of the night after you're done with your homework before bed, whatever it might be. But I do think this is the time to start those routines again, to start those expectations again in the home. But like anything, it's moderation. I'm never an extremist in that way where it's like, you're taking everything away and we're not doing that anymore. And there's not going to be any, sort of technology. Everyone can do whatever they want to do in their life. But I just feel like when the outside world has so much going on that is out of our control, and there are things that have been taken away from us, like I said, I just don't believe in further punishing ourselves. So that's why moderation, I think, is always key.
And something you also just said about schedules. So you think
schedules are important, and children respond to them. One of my friends was talking to me about how they weren't doing their chores anymore, and they used to have a chore chart and do all of that every day, and they kind of got off of that with COVID, and they brought it back now with the beginning of the school year, and they started it about a week before everyone went back to school, which I think is smart because you got to prepare for it. But they said that it changed actually leaps and bounds how their children were behaving. Because they do crave that structure. They don't want to be told that they need structure. Don't tell the kids that, but they want it on a level that maybe they can't access or realize. But it does change the behavior of your child. It changes the rhythm of your home. So again, start small. Maybe it's a chore chart. Maybe it's something like that. Or maybe it's just, you could be very simple. It's just the expectations or the values of the home that's taped to your refrigerator or something like that. But just something that's visible.
That's a wonderful message to end this. I just have one final question. How can people find out more about you and your services?
I'm all over social media. You can go to florenceann.romano for my website. I have lots of blogs there to help you out, but also very active on Instagram, florenceann.romano. I answer every DM I get.
We've been speaking with child care advocate Florence Ann Romano.